The low vibration of a deep groan bounced against the walls of Matthew's head. The nausea that swirled in his gut kept his eyes tightly shut, and the darkness around him reinforced it. But the sharp pain in the back of his head was prying his eyes open and his mind awake. He turned his head, weakly attempting to shake off the sickness, but instead the pain worsened. He coughed, retching into the void next to the thin mattress he lay on. The cell was dark, the only light coming from a single light bulb down the hall. There was no window through which he could spot sunlight. His bed was a mattress barely thick enough to protect him from the cold floor and too short to keep his feet from touching it. He had no blankets, no pillow, nothing to bring him the slightest bit of comfort. He never would have imagined a place like this in the jails of America. But here it was, a place reserved for only the worst of criminals. Criminals like Matthew, Christians. The land of religious freedom had finally succumbed to Satan's rule. He had seen it coming, but never thought it would happen in his lifetime. Matthew winced as he tried to raise his head. Clenching his teeth against the pain, he forced his body into a sitting position where he slumped, exhausted from the effort. A cold draft filtered into the room, and he wrapped his arms around himself, shivering. That was when the voices came.
The penalty for faith is death.
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 He was used to them by now. The prisoners used them to tell time. From within the walls of the cells, the chanting echoed.
The penalty for faith is death.
At times he was able to ignore it, but today Matthew's head rang with every word. He could almost feel Satan's claws digging into his mind with each repetition.
The penalty for faith is death.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I will fear no evil. Oh God, I've never been so afraid.
He looked around, glancing out into the corridor, checking around him for signs that a guard was near. There was nothing. He turned his body slowly and groped around his mattress. Near where his shoulder had been, he found the thin slit made in the frail bedding. With shaking fingers, he reached inside and pulled out a sheet of dry, crackling paper. The bloodstains on the thin page matched the red print, and in some places it covered it completely. Not that it mattered. He couldn't read in this darkness anyway, and he didn't need to. These words had been printed on his mind ages ago.
Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
A shudder passed through his bones as he remembered the stories he had heard. Stephen stoned, Peter, Andrew, and Philip crucified, Bartholomew beheaded, and those were only just the beginning. Thousands came after, and they were all dead, dead like he would be soon. The penalty for faith is death. Just then he heard the clatter of chains in the hall. Looking up anxiously, what he saw made him forget the paper in his hand. A woman was being taken out from the deeper cells, a woman he had thought was free and safely hidden.
Stacy? No, Stacy, please, God, this can't be happening.
Ignoring the pain in his head, Matthew rushed to the bars between them. The page he'd been holding was now crumpled as he grabbed two bars and leaned all his weight against them, unable to hold himself up on his own. The two guards who were dragging Stacy away stopped. her drooping head raised and turned towards Matthew. A sob broke from his throat when he saw the bruises marring her beautiful face, and he fell to his knees. One of the guards stood holding Stacy's elbow, his face emotionless and unmoved. The other, however, with a cruel look in his eyes, a snarl on his lips, and his nose wrinkled in disgust, barked at Matthew, interrupting his grief.
Hey! Quiet in there! I said shut up! What's that? In your hand, freak. Give it to me.
Matthew slid away, clutching his precious contraband to his chest, tears streaming. The guard ripped the sheet from his hand, the fragile material tearing between them. Matthew clenched his fragment tightly between his fingers, watching the guard's face as it tensed, twisted, and reddened.
Oh, Jesus, freak. You still carry this trash around? Well, we told you about this. This garbage will result in your death.
Matthew prayed quickly and silently, and swallowing his fear, he bravely looked the guard in the eye.
It's not. It isn't. No. This is not trash. This is the holy word of...
Matthew grunted as a fist landed hard in his gut. He groaned and doubled over, but soon found a bruise forming on the side of his head and ringing surrounding his mind from both blows. He heard a shriek pierce through the fuzz that was blanketing his brain.
You want them? You want this freak? And you want to go with this fanatic nut you call your wife?
Stacy.
Answer me! Do you want to go to your death with her? Do you?
Yes. Because for me to live is Christ. But to die is gain.
All right then, freak. Let's go.
He grabbed Matthew's arm, and with the baton he pulled out, rained blows on him as he pushed him through the halls, Stacy and the other warden trailing behind. Someone was shaking his shoulder. A firm but gentle hand was waking him, and the pain came rushing back.
Darling. Darling, wake up.
The blows to his head, the kicks and the punches, the pounding of the stick on his back and shoulders all flooded his memory, and their aftermath flooded his senses. He opened his eyes, hoping to escape the pain that seemed to grow in the darkness. There beside him sat his beautiful wife, but her usually sparkling eyes now shone with tears through the thin slits the bruises allowed her to open them. Her rosy cheeks were swollen and red. Her full, sweet lips were torn and bleeding. He wanted to hold her. He tried to rise but fell back, nearly crying out in agony.
Shh. Don't move. You'll hurt yourself. You were beaten up pretty badly.
Matthew gritted his teeth and clenched his eyes shut as he stubbornly sat up.
It's okay.
Stacy could do nothing but gently try to help him. Finally, he was able to open his eyes and raise his head to gaze on his wife. He reached a trembling hand to her face and tentatively fingered the bruises.
When did this happen? How long have they had you here?
They caught me. Just a few days after you left. The man we trusted, he turned me in.
Who would do this? What kind of a filthy animal would do this to my wife? I will kill the man who did this. I swear.
Love them. Forgive them. Don't be angry. I consider it as a joy. We've been blessed. We've been seen as worthy to suffer for Jesus. Matt, darling, if we can't face death for him, how can we say we lived for him?
Stacy stretched out her shaking fingers to wipe away a tear trailing down her husband's face. They collapsed into each other's arms, their bodies trembling with fear, anxiousness, and pain.
It's okay, it's okay. Be strong, darling. Rejoice and be glad. We're going home.
Matthew looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps and noticed for the first time what kind of room he was in. The walls and doors were made up of a dark gray concrete, but there in the top of the eastern wall was a tiny window, and through that small opening, after months in darkness, he could finally see and feel the warmth of sunlight. Cold arms gripped his own and wrenched him away from
Strong,
Stacy.
darling.
He looked into her face and saw peace in her eyes, and on her cracked lips he saw a smile. And then he saw nothing. But the black hood thrown over his head couldn't keep out the warmth of the joy he now felt. The short walk that took him out into the cold wind couldn't take him away from the peace he had. And the shot that felled him to the ground couldn't take away his love for his God. Someone was shaking his shoulder. A firm but gentle hand was waking him.
Beloved, wake up. Rise.
And immense love seemed to flow from the voice, washing over him like nothing he had ever felt before. He opened his eyes. There beside him was his Savior, his hand resting on Matthew's shoulder. The hand moved down his arm and, grasping Matthew's hand, helped him to his feet. Matthew looked down at the hand just to be sure, and tears filled his eyes when he saw it. His eyes never left the scar as the hand of his Lord moved to wipe away his tears. He looked up into the face of his King and melted in awe of him. Matthew's heart was nearly bursting with joy and love when Jesus wrapped his arms around him. And while we lingered in the heavenly embrace, Matthew raised his head and saw Stacy. She was beautiful. Her bruises had vanished. Her face glowed with a beauty Matthew had never imagined before. Her eyes shone with peace. Her lips beamed in a smile of indescribable joy, and her face was inflamed with love. Smiling lovingly, Jesus turned and took Matthew's hand, stepping toward Stacy. She embraced her Savior tightly, then, glowing with excitement, wrapped her arms around Matthew. When they finally released each other, they slipped their hands into those of their Lord, and together they stepped into his kingdom. They were home.
Great Is Your Reward was written and produced by Samantha Grace Gandy. Our narrator was Dr. Malcolm Brubaker. Matthew was played by Jared Spiro, Stacy by Crystal Rodriguez, the prison guard by John Pierre, the voices by Kyle Hinton and Cassie Davis, with Timothy Jackson as the voice of Jesus. Thank you for listening, and please stay tuned for some bloopers and deleted scenes.